All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Wilton Library. I'm Michael Bellicosa. I'm the head of adult programming here, so that means I get to organize all these kind of great programs with a lot of partners in the community. And we've been working with SpedNet for a long time, and their programs are always very interesting, very informative. So I'd like to thank our friends at SpedNet, also the Wilton Public Schools, and also Sped Newtown PTA, which are the co-sponsors of today's program. And with that, I'm going to turn over the real introduction to my friend Eve Kessler from SpedNet.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to see you all out. I know I was so glad it wasn't yesterday because we didn't have a snow date. Today, Todd Kellogg, a licensed behavior analyst and family therapist, will walk you through the best practices of co-parenting, successful communication patterns, and how to bounce back after setbacks. A few things. We have some attitude magazines and attention magazines in the back. They came to me that I'm done with them, so feel free to take them. They're both terrific. Attention is through Chad. If any of you have kids with ADHD, the attitude one comes online as well, and it's really it's fantastic. Todd has worked in the field of disability since 1994 as a behavior and family therapist for the Greenwich Autism Project of Abilis. He developed a series of social skills groups for children with Asperger's and high-functioning autism. He continues to develop social skills lessons and curricula used within his private practice, Positive Family Behavior, LLC. In addition to social skills, Todd has worked with children, their families, and their school-based teams to resolve challenging behaviors so children can learn and develop in the least restrictive environment. He advocates for services to be delivered according to the child's particular needs through an appropriate combination of individual therapy, family therapy, parent coaching, school consultations, and the development of positive behavior support plans. For those of you who might not be familiar with SpedNet, we have a fantastic website, spednet.org. It used to be SpedNet Wilton, but we are now SpedNet. It has videotapes of all of our presentations and webinars on there. They're separated by topic and by speaker. And they're really easy to access and just share with your team or with your spouse, or we have a whole series of college-based ones to share with your kids. Todd is going to speak first, and then we'll do questions and answers afterwards. Okay, and we'll be passing around the mic at the end for questions and answers. Now, this is being recorded, so if you your faces aren't going to be shown or anything like that. It's going to be the screen, and it's going to be Todd. So just for questions and answers, understand that it's going to be recorded, and you might not want to use people's names or whatever. Anyway, with that, we are very happy to welcome Todd.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Eve, and I thank SpedNet. I certainly thank the Wilton Library. It's one of the few places I can come and everything's set up and ready to go. I don't have to worry about, if you ever have to talk in front of people and bring a computer, you always spend the first 20 minutes worried about the technology and is it going to work or not. So it works, and it was working before I got here, working now, so it's great. So I'm very appreciative of that. And I love SpedNet. I realized you've changed your name, and that's great. I used to do some talks over at Waveney for the New Canaan SpedNet group and the Wilton group, and I've been in Monroe and so forth. So it's a great support organization for parents and families. So today we're going to be talking about co-parenting. And as I was preparing this, I went back. There's some new material, but I went back and looked at some prior things that I've had. And this is an old picture that I've used over and over again. It doesn't really matter, you can replace the people in this picture, but I like this picture because it arranges a family in a certain hierarchy. And what I'm talking about today, applies for all families. The focus is families with children with some special needs status. and I will include that, especially in some of the stories that I have for you. But regardless of your family, this is a healthy family dynamic here. Now, does anybody want to? You don't have to you want to guess why this family arrangement is considered the optimum level if you were to, go to grad school and learn family therapy. This is what we all strive for. You want to guess why? Generations. Okay, multi-generational, right? That's always very helpful. Yep. Extended family, yeah. So that you're all right. That's exactly it. And in addition to that, the reason why this visual is so helpful in describing family hierarchy or setup is that you notice that the parents are on top. So those in this visual, those are the parents. And we'll say that that's his sister, and that's the oldest daughter, grandparents, and then the youngest. And the reason why that's such a great visual is because this represents that when a family's running well, right, the parents are on top, communicating. Notice that neither parent is above the other parent, right? They're basically equal. And if you were to follow this, if this is truly how the family operates, then if the parents aren't around, it's going to be the aunt or the older sister who kind of calls the shots, right? It tries to help maintain the order and structure. And if they're not around, then it's going to be the grandparents. And hopefully at this age, these kids will never be by themselves for too long, right? But the point is that when I work with families, if there's a significant difficulty in the family, sometimes if this picture were to represent the way things are operating, the child might be up here, right? Some cases, the child might even be here, right? And that's when the challenging behavior gets to the point where, they're unfortunately they're calling the shots in so many words, right? Or just the behavior is so difficult that the parents or the family doesn't really know how to address it. And so there's a lot of challenging behavior that's being reinforced and maintained over time. So everything we're going to talk about today is meant to strengthen this unit here. And if this unit is strengthened, things fall underneath. It doesn't really matter who this is. It could be partners, parents, guardians. It just if you have a person you're working with, that's the person we're talking about. Two people, and these are not the children; these are the adults. Okay. So moving forward, so there's basically two. We can kind of break it down. Parenting approaches. There's two generic ways of parenting approaches. One is that nurturing part, and the other is the disciplining part. And I know life is not this simple, but if we try to look at it this way, at least, and I kind of chose these words carefully underneath each one. Nurturing is affectionate and kindness, being present, which is huge. Present means, that not too many people have a screen in front of them, they're available and in close proximity. Closeness, having that, some families are more touchy-feely than others, but having that connection. And of course, there's caring, and it takes time. And disciplining is, rules, predictability, boundaries, correction. One person I like to listen to a lot, it's like learning the guardrails of life. Like the oven's hot. It's always, I was talking to someone the other day. I said, it doesn't matter whether it's a microwave, an oven, or a campfire. They all burn. So, you have to know that. And so it's parents helping their children understand, what's expected and what needs to happen for their safety and their health and their just general well-being. So, seatbelts are a great example. I mean, very few parents, I know seatbelts can be a challenge. I've worked with families that have seatbelt challenges, but that's one area that most people would agree that that's not a non-negotiable. Seatbelts are required. Walking across the street holding your hand when the child's particularly young, or if the child is due to their learning differences is not aware or can't really understand, that a car can come and hit them, that they're going to have to wait for you. So I've worked with parents on helping their children, regardless of their age, stay in close proximity and match their pace as they're walking in town or across the street or so forth, because you can't bolt ahead. So these are two basically large parenting approaches, the nurturing and the disciplining. Now, depending on the percentage of the breakdown, the family might have a style that falls in one of these three categories. Now, you see a coin that's there because Dr. Scott Sells, I'm a big believer of Dr. Scott Sells. You look him up. He's been around for a very long time. And he, no pun intended, but he coined this term, I think, where he said, parenting is, disciplining and nurturing are two sides of the same coin in parenting. You can't have one without the other. You can't have one without the other. Now, depending on the family and the percentage, whether it's, 50-50 or 60-40 or whatever, 80-20, leaning towards nurturing versus disciplining, that's when this parenting style will develop. So you have on the far left, permissive, which means an extra amount of, there could be a lot of nurturing, but very little or not enough, perhaps, guidance around the disciplining part or the boundaries. You have authoritative, which is kind of a balanced approach, authoritative, where you have the nurturing intact, you have the communications around boundaries intact, you have the follow through, you have and then what we're going to be talking about today is that the two parents or guardians, caregivers will be working together to kind of strike this kind of balance. And then the authoritarian is a lot of disciplining, just a lot of disciplining, a lot of correction, and perhaps not listening as much or understanding. There's this one guy I listened to once a long time ago. He was, I forget his name, but I always remember his story. He, before there was smartphones, he would take a recorder with the parents' permission, of course, and he would tape it underneath the dining room or kitchen table. And they would record their meals, their conversations. And the families that really struggled a lot, within a 30 to 45-minute meal, he counted how many times the parents corrected their children at the table, It could be anything from sit up straight, you have to eat your vegetables, don't leave the table without asking, or a number of things. And so the families that really struggled, do you want to guess what the average number of corrections were in a 30 to 45-minute meal? You want to throw out a guess? 200. Okay, that's a lot. And that's why he was there. He was working with them. But 200. And so, and that's just an example, but if it's two, and I often suggest if you can find times during the day where it's as unconditional as possible, like, not talking about homework, or not talking about, for the adults, not talking about taxes or politics or anything like that. Just if you could just talk about, each other and how your day went and something that's more an easier topic, a softer topic, that could be a more enjoyable meal. But that's so that's an example, right? So now, where do we fall? So where we fall largely, not always, but largely depends on our family of origin. So I found this really cool diagram online. If you squint or if you print it out the handout, you'll see where I found it at the very bottom. But this is a great family of origin diagram because it shows that both parents come from their original family, 1, 2, and depending on how they were raised and their experience, by the time they get together with their spouse or partner, they're going to bring with them a tendency to be more of a disciplinarian or a tendency to be a little bit more nurturing, right? Perhaps not jump as quick or on something or stop and listen more. And you are who you are. So what's meant to happen is that as both parents work together, they find a bit of a balance. But often what's seen is that parents sometimes argue, about you're not strong enough or you don't follow through. The other person's like, well, you never listen to them. And the different parenting styles that we we develop in our own family of origin are not meant to be a liability, right? They're meant to be a strength. You want to complement one another. If you see it that way, that will be extremely helpful. So just, and so when I work with families, it doesn't take long to figure out which one leans towards disciplining more, which one leans towards, thinking about the nurturing part or being more easygoing. And so you identify that, and I work with the couple on being able to acknowledge and appreciate each other's role, but that doesn't mean they cancel each other out, right? So, even my own marriage, my wife tends to be more of their nurturing, and I'm more of the disciplinarian. And I know exactly why, because I was raised that way. I mean, I couldn't get away with much at all growing up. And so it just came natural for me. But when I work with families, it's the same thing. And so whether one parent is more of a nurturing, the other parent's more of a disciplining, you both win, right? So hence the blue ribbon and the trophy. It doesn't really matter who's who or what. If you acknowledge and appreciate each other's role, then it could be more of a collaborative unit. Knowing that not one strategy or one approach, I should say, is always going to trump the other. Sometimes you're going to need to stop and listen and understand and be patient and wait. And sometimes you need to follow through and be super consistent and not give in, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but they're both needed. And depending on how you grew up, you're going to kind of lean towards one or the other. Okay. So that's kind of the intro here. So there's a term called button pushing, and I'm going to read this definition. Button pushing consists of one person, including the child, saying or doing something to another that results in the receiver experiencing a quick escalation of anxiety and related emotions, which could be frustration, anger, and sadness. A young child acting out may push his or her parent's buttons, leading the parent to have more of an emotional response than a logical, tempered response, further resulting in the original message, the lesson or the rule, or some predetermined consequence not happening or being lost in the exchange. So, why am I including this? Well, I'm calling it button pushing because that's kind of an old term, or a term that's been used in the past. Scott Sells was one of those guys who used it, and it's just meant to say we all have our buttons. And when I used to work with families, when we really focused on button pushing, people would identify what buttons they had, they write them on a yellow sticky, and they get to put them on each other. Like, no, this is your button. Whenever I say or do this, you go nuts, and I put it on there, And then the kid gets to do the same thing, because kids have their buttons too. So this slide is the younger child version, right? The handout, one of the handouts that you got in the email is the older child, the teen version, right? The more advanced version of this, which has to do more with, maybe swearing and those, maybe, more physical kind of acting out. But the point is that we all have our buttons. And what happens is that, this is just an example of them, but it's a family dynamic. So when someone says or does something, and this could be a challenging, most of these buttons are a challenging behavior, right? Whether it's the parents, yelling, or shouting across the house, or telling someone you're not going to ever have a play date again, or whatever, something like that. Like that's a button. Or whether it's a child, screaming or yelling or knocking things over, or refusing to go to bed, refusing to brush your teeth. If it happens over and over again, that becomes a pattern, and pretty soon it gets under our skin and it has us react in certain ways. So these are buttons. Now, what we're going to talk about is, why this is the case. So when you have this family dynamic part and you feel like you're getting kind of escalating, you're emotionally escalating. And of course, we're going to talk about how parents help each other with this. But the reason is because it's anxiety. That's what it comes down to. All of us, right? Anxiety is a normal human experience. It's meant, we have healthy anxiety, of course, right? But just in general, when it comes to loved ones, when it comes to our children especially, you can't help, subconsciously at the very least, to think forward in life. Like, what does this mean if they are banging their head on the floor now. What does this mean when they go to kindergarten or first grade or class or so forth? What's going to happen to them? They're hurting themselves. I mean, anxiety is always based in the future, whether it's 2 seconds from now, 5 minutes from now, 10 years from now. That's where the anxiety lives. So that's why we respond the way we do sometimes when a behavior becomes a button or a certain, which means language too. If someone says something to me over and over again that's very disrespectful or bothers you, or like the teenagers will say, well, you're a terrible parent. Let me tell you why. And they'll give you a list. And that's like, that's a button because they're hitting you with that. So today we're going to talk about, the anxieties related to, the whole fight-flight response. Okay, so there's anxiety, you have this response, and either you're going to withdraw or you're going to be angry, okay? So withdrawal looks more like kind of caving a bit. It looks, giving up, getting close to being depressed. That's withdrawal. And if anybody has any questions on that later on, we can talk more about that. But what typically happens with children, parents and children, at least initially, is that if their buttons are getting hit, there's a challenging behavior that's really getting under your skin, you're anxious, you're likely to have more, if you're going to have an escalated response, it's going to be more of an anger response, kind of like frustration and, pulling your hair out of head kind of stuff. So what we learn in grad school is that anxiety does not exist by itself, okay? Underneath anxiety is that anger response that we just mentioned. There's a withdrawal response too, but there's that anger response is what we're highlighting. Okay, so there it is. I get anxious, I get angry. So meaning like if someone is about to, working with a family where twice now, the boy in a scooter went across Post Road in Westport, right across. And without the dad was too far. Kids zipped up and zapped, across Post Road without his father. So his father, of course, was, screaming, stop, 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 and, thank God the boy didn't get hurt. Now, this little fella thinks he has all the answers. Trust me, he's a great little guy, but he does. And he thought there was no cars coming, and maybe there wasn't, but the point was he didn't have permission to cross. He was only in first grade. He's in first grade, right? So he shouldn't be crossing Post Road without the parent, on a scooter. And so the father was extremely nervous and scared. But of course, when they got home, what do you think happened? Right? He was really angry, like really angry. And I remember talking to the young fella, and he's like, my dad always yells at me. And I'm like, well, you know where that comes from, right? He was scared, okay? And then he got angry because you didn't listen, and he was afraid that you were going to get hurt. And so that's the anxiety part, right? And then it leads to anger and frustration. But prior to anxiety is fear, right? In this case, he was afraid that his son was going to get hit by a car. And then, of course, behind the fear is the loss, right? And so what happens if he did get hit by a car? How is his life going to change? How is our family going to change? Is he going to live? Like all this goes through your head really, really fast, right? And you have to break it down. But that's where the anger comes from. It's an anxiety response based on fear and on the deepest level, a sense of loss or potential loss. And that's what drives us because we love our children. We love our children. Or it could be anybody that you are emotionally connected to that you love. That we always have this dynamic of when we have anxiety, right? It's based on loss, fear, boom, I'm anxious, and then I'm angry. Now, a lot of times we don't realize, we know when this is happening because it's obvious. If you are close to somebody, they know when you're angry. You can even hold it in. They know when you're angry. My wife, when I'm angry, I don't have to say a word. She just looks at me and she's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, is it really obvious? But it is sometimes. And of course, our kids know when we're angry. But I bet you most of them don't know that we're anxious, or maybe we don't even know that that's where it comes from. And of course, they have no idea about the fear of loss because they're not parents, they're just kids, right? So they don't understand what it's like to have a parent and care for your child and deal with this. So this is under the co-parenting pitfalls, like button pushing and our emotional connections with our children. This is kind of the baggage that we have sometimes. Now, as you probably understand, then if you have a large emotional reaction, that's part, that takes up part of your brain energy. And you can Google this, look it up. You can read books on this. But we're told, and I guess we experience this to a certain degree, that it is hard to keep that connection with being logical and purposeful and thoughtful at the same time that your emotions are like skyrocketing. It's just very, very difficult, right? So we've all been there where we're like, after some kind of emotional escalation, whether it's with our partner, our spouse, our kids, after we have a moment, we're like, why in the world did I say or do that? What was I thinking? And that's the thing. You weren't thinking, right? You weren't thinking. It was an emotional response. Your emotions were taking over based on anxiety, fear, and loss, right? So that's what happens. So why am I telling you all this? Well, because if you have a partner or a parent, co-parent to help with this, right? That's where this comes in. They can help, you guys can help pull each other in a little bit and not react in a way that you wish not to react if your buttons are being pushed. So I think I was going to wait. I was like trying to figure out when to say this one line. So I think I'll say it now. I was at a wedding once, right? And the minister who was doing the wedding, he had a very powerful message to the couple getting married. He goes, and they're married, they're young, right? They don't have a family yet. And he goes, I don't know whether you're going to have children or not. I don't know. You don't know whether you're going to have children or not. You might plan on it. You just don't know. And you don't know who those children are going to be. But he goes, the best gift you can give your children is to love one another. Always love one another, no matter what. Because that will break through to whatever difficulty comes. Now, that's a beautiful thing to hear, especially at a wedding, right? Now, as a therapist and as a family member where my parents got divorced, I'm thinking to myself, well, where does that fit in? It's always. And so I thought if I had to come up with a second part of that statement, it would be the second best gift you can give your children is to co-parent effectively. That would make all the difference in the world. If you can't stay together, at least work together. And that will make a huge difference in your child's development. So basically, even if you're not living together, right, you have the ability to co-parent if you're both involved. Now, in some of these cases, it will be more easy to do these strategies than others, but basically, if parents understand, and maybe a counselor or a therapist helps with this, but they understand, yes, I have my buttons. Yes, I have my hot spots when someone says or he says or does this or she does this. I don't know what it is. I just lose it. It makes me feel whatever. We know where it comes from, right? Loss, fear, anxiety. So being aware that you even have these buttons. And, one strategy is for the partner or the parent to have a signal. Because remember, if you're getting emotional, you're not going to even be able to hear much if you're getting too upset or angry. But I remember Scott Sells would recommend, do one of these signals, like your buttons being pushed or something like this, a signal that says to the other person, you are starting to get really upset. And I understand why, because he or she, this is going in a way that where in the past has caused you to get really anxious, frustrated, angry, whatever the emotions are. And so if just knowing that we have our buttons, right, just knowing that gives us a little bit of empowerment sometimes over it. Like, okay, that's my buttons being pushed. It's kind of like OCD. Like if someone's struggling with OCD, knowing that they have OCD is a huge thing, right? Because you can say part of the treatment is, oh, that's my OCD pattern. That's my OCD thinking that's happening. Okay, that's my intrusive thought. All right, I got it. I named it. I got it. It doesn't have to own me. I know what it is, kind of thing. So that's kind of like knowing you have buttons, knowing that when they get, the buttons again are that certain behavior that really gets under your skin. Now, just knowing you have the buttons is great, but then there's also reasons why the child's doing it. They're not, all our children, are not, they're not little monsters. They're beautiful, beautiful kids, right? But the point is that there's a reason why we do it. And in applied behavioral analysis, we try, we find the function of behaviors. I'm sure you probably heard that, the function of behavior, whether it's to gain something like some tangible or avoidance or escape, or it could be automatic reinforcement, which is I'm doing this because it just feels good. I know it looks awkward or you don't understand, but I like doing this because it feels good. Automatic reinforcement. So those are all functions. And if this was more of a ABA, applied behavioral analysis, BCBA type of leaning talk, I would say out of those functions, a family that tends to lean more towards authoritarian style elicits a lot of avoidance and escape behavior. A family that leans more towards the permissive side solicits a lot of, they call it tangible, like I want this event, I want to go to this person's house, I want to have that toy, I want to stay up later than I'm supposed to. So a family that leans to be more permissive gets a lot of that function of behavior, depending on where you are. And even though I'm suggesting that you want to have a more balanced approach, if you're balanced, you're going to get both, right? But that's okay because there's always a way out of it. For our talk today, I'm kind of like basically breaking it down to this. So, which is this could all fall in one of the functions in applied behavioral analysis, but to distract the parent. Like, hey, how many times has that happened to you where you think you're pursuing a certain end or objective, and the child has a certain behavior, and you get distracted from following through. I mean, that can happen a lot around homework, right? Do your homework, clean your room. We have to do this before we do that. We do the non-preferred thing before doing the preferred activity, and you get distracted. You forgot to follow through. I mean, how many times have we told our kids, for those kids who are on the screens, time to get off your screen, and you get distracted. Even the behavior distracts you. What do you mean? What are you talking about? I am supposed to have 10 more minutes, or I'm right in the middle of a game, or you always tell me to do this at the worst time. Why do you always do this? And it's like on and on and on, and you get distracted. And that could be the function, that could be the reason why the behavior is happening. Sometimes, especially you have teenagers, preteens and teens, they developmentally are really tuned in to our emotional reactions, emotional responses. So sometimes the whole point is to get an emotional reaction out of you, right? To have that happen. Now, no one wants to get yelled at, right? But there are certain, when you become a teen, you actually sometimes really do fall into the trap of wanting to argue with your parents. Does that ever happen, right? And so when that happens, that often means, I'm going to be yelled at, but I'm arguing with you because I think I'm right, or I know I'm right, or you're definitely not right. My son will say sometimes, well, I don't know if I'm right, but you're definitely not right. So I'm like, okay, all right. That's a pretty weak argument, by the way. But, and so, or in some cases to retaliate or to hurt feelings. Because, and then this is the hardest one, I think, when a child does something and the parent, sees it as a kind of a mean behavior, like, being called something or saying, you never, you don't love me like daddy does or mommy does or whatever, like something like that, just kind of really, now they still love you, of course, but because of who they are, they're looking for that reaction. They're looking for you to kind of have that emotional, hiccup and not be able to maybe follow through or whatever the purpose was. To guilt, teens are really good at finding things that, that give you guilt and interrupt follow through. So as co-parents, not only can you help each other find, remind each other, we have buttons. This is my button. Remember, that's your main button. And let's help each other know when that's being pushed. But also remind each other, if not during, maybe even afterwards, I know you're upset, but don't forget, this is what he does when we corner him and tell him he has to follow through on something, our son or daughter, and she lashes at us, right? And that's the point, to get us off our game. So we're going to go back in there and we're going to follow through with what we just started, right? So kind of thing. So we're just kind of like doing that kind of stuff. But knowing that there's a reason behind it sometimes takes away some of the sting. That's the whole point. Okay. Parents to be brief and concise. Okay, so parents can help each other be brief and concise. So this is really important when you're involved in some type of, not a power struggle per se, but there's a back and forth between you and the child. And that child could be just ignoring you or acting out or bolting or, basically, beginning to knock things over, whatever the case may be. And so what we tend to do sometimes is we tend to overtalk, Now, I don't know any of your children, but I know, and so I don't know where they are as far as their special needs status, but I can pretty much guarantee we're all very verbal in here, right? We tend to use our speech as our primary means of communication. And when you have that ability, we tend to use it and use it and use it and use it and use it. And sometimes we overuse it. So if you get into, this happens all the time with all of us, we get into repeating over and over again, repeating over and over again. And then, of course, arguing, making our case. This is while the challenging stuff is happening. And what both parents can help each other is, hey, there's a time to be really brief and concise. Like, be brief because we've already set up what we're supposed to do. We're just following through now. We don't need to retell the whole story of why you have a certain bedtime. Like, we don't have to relive that every single time you challenge the bedtime. We already know why. We don't have to repeat it. So being brief and concise will help, because when your button gets pushed, you tend to keep going on and on. Now, there's a family I once observed, and I helped the mom understand. I said, if you were to record this, or if I recorded it, or if your partner, your parent, co-parents recorded this, most parent-child relationships, whether it's a mom or dad or whatever, they will have an average number of times they repeat. An average number. Could be 7, could be 6, could be 5. Now, it changes from time to time. Like if it's before school, the buses, they're going to miss the bus perhaps, or the van, you might repeat less at that moment because you have less time. But by and large, we tend to have an average number of times we repeat something to our children. And they know that. Subconsciously, at the very least, they know that. So sometimes you wonder, well, how come they never listen? That's because at the 8th time, you actually got up and approached them. And they knew that was a signal that there was going to be a consequence. So that's when they finally got up and listened, begrudgingly, right? And so one way to help is to teach your children, I'm not going to repeat anymore. I'm going to say it once, and I'll say it twice just in case, but that's it. It'll never be more than twice. And that's hard to do, but you'll find it be a lot easier on you. And the parents can help each other do that. Sticking to a plan. So not every plan is always a great plan, but at some point in one of these slides, you'll see the parental unit. The collaboration on the parental unit itself sometimes is often more important than the plan or the strategy, right? Because cracks in the parenting unit, right? It doesn't matter what plan you have, it'll never work. But at least if you're marching to the same drum, you're kind of like, okay, we're balancing our nurturing and disciplining parts, and we're following through, even if it's not the best plan, we'll learn from it, we'll adjust, we'll move on. But sticking to the plan is important, so that the emotional reaction we get sometimes takes us off of our plan. And the other parent can say, no, we got a plan. We know what we're doing here. And then stopping and listening. Later on, we'll talk about a real powerful, very, very powerful parental, I call it intervention, that you can do that has to do with stopping and listening. I'll wait, though, until we get to that slide. But I'll say now, listen, stop and listen. You'd be surprised, right? And a parent can help each other. Like, wait a minute, let's just stop and listen to what he or she is saying again, just in case we miss something. And I always tell kids this all the time. The word listen, the same letters spell another word that's required in order to listen. So listen is L-I-S-T-E-N. What other word can you spell with the exact same letters that's required in order to listen? Silent. Yeah, same letters. Just mix them up a little bit. Silent. And so you'd be surprised what happens when you're silent. First of all, if there's an argument, well, you end it because you can't argue. You could argue with yourself, but it gets a little ridiculous. So the person keeps going. Pretty soon there's no. It's like, if they ever hit, anybody play tennis, like what happens when the person stops hitting the ball back? Well, you're going to run out of tennis balls at some point. Well, it's the same thing when someone's arguing. If you stop, they can only argue for so much longer, and then they're going to stop too because they need a back and forth. It's reciprocal. So just stopping and listening sometimes kind of slows that down. These are all techniques. Now, exit and wait. Some of these go together, right? Stopping, slowing down, exiting and waiting. Exit and waiting means you slow things down. You might have been caught off guard, shocked, right? When it gets too difficult to stay calm. Because remember, we're talking about trying to be calm. Later on, I'll say, what's the 3 C's of parenting? It's one of them is being calm. We'll get to the other 2. But calm, like trying to be calm, like trying to help each other stay at least calm enough so we're using our logical part of our brain in addition to our emotional part of our brain. To model self-control, that's a huge thing. That's a huge thing. Kids will learn from what we say. They'll most definitely learn from what we do. So even if I'm upset and I show enough self-control to say, I'm taking a break. I need time to myself. And then we'll have to deal with this. I can't do this right now. I'm too upset. And walking under control, out of saying that somewhat under control, walking away under control. That sends a clear message to the child that that's to be valued. And then to regroup and proceed. So one of my favorite examples, if I didn't have the mic, I'd be walking around demonstrating this. But one of my favorite examples was a long time ago, and it was one of the first families I worked with that had this type of situation. So the boy was a teenager. He was very gifted. At the time, he had the diagnosis of Asperger's, bipolar, and OCD. And a remarkable young man. And he was like 17-ish. Remarkable young man. But he had a lot of challenges. And the family was from another country. So they had a bit of an accent. And I was in the kitchen. It was a beautiful home. I was in the kitchen. And the teenager with the Asperger's, OCD, and bipolar. Anyways, he got things got out of control, and he took the phone, the house phone, and smashed it on the kitchen marble floor, like whatever, tile floor, whatever. Just the phone was in pieces, like before iPhones, before smartphones. This is like probably the most important phone in the house, right in the kitchen. But boom, smashes it. And I'm like, so this happens very fast. And I see what's happening. And before I can even say anything, mom, dad, and the teen all took off. Now, I said it was a beautiful house. It was. The kitchen had 3 different ways to get in and out of that kitchen. The library, family room, the stairs. Anyways, they all left in a different direction. And I was standing there by myself with a broken phone on the floor. I'm like, I didn't say anything. What did happen here? And later on, I found out that was their family timeout. That's something they already established before I even ever got involved. And I said, that was remarkable, because imagine if 2 of you stayed after that happened. I mean, imagine if the teen and the mom stayed. So the mom was the disciplinarian in this family. The dad was more of the nurturing side. They both were both. I'm not saying they're not mutually exclusive, but she, being more of the disciplinary side, her buttons were so pushed at this situation. And she got out. Dad got out. If mom and dad stayed, they would have argued, no doubt about it. If mom and the teen stayed, more would have been broken. And if the dad and the teen stayed, I don't know what would happen, but they all left, and it was good. So sometimes just exiting and waiting and just getting yourself more under control, or get your thoughts together, because as bad as something would just happen, it could get far, far worse. So that's one strategy that parents can help each other. Like, hey, we gotta. Why don't you take a break? I got it from here, or I need to take a break. You take it from here, or we're all taking a break, like this one family. And that's the exit and wait. strategy. Okay. Okay. Then there's this. So then this is really good for, again, this is all meant for parents to help each other with. This is one, and you could practice this, which I know some parents would love to practice with one another. But if you have a child that really is very good in their speech, and they come at you all the time with, why, or always looking for the exception, or wanting to get something that like they want to avoid their homework, and they want to watch TV first, or they want to do the game first, or they want to stay up later, or it could be whatever it is, and it's just not doable, and they're going to wear you out on and on because they're very good at their speech. They're going to wear you out. So, and the wearing you out, the ongoing, unrelenting, asking, repeat from the child is going to get on your skin. So the strategy, and by the way, the visual here, I should point it out, button buster, right? That's what they call it. We're breaking this button. Is to have, if you have to say anything at all, because you don't have to say anything, you just follow through. That's the brief and concise. I said what I said. You're going to hear me. I'm going to be silent now because I'm standing by what I said. And then you can just do your best, but that's hard. So if you can't, then you have a one phrase, one word to answer, regardless, or nevertheless, or no exception. So nevertheless, bedtime's at 10. Nevertheless, bedtime's at 10, whatever it is. Nevertheless, it is. If you have to say anything at all. So that way, the child, it gives you a response that's not an emotional escalated response, right? It gives you kind of a more planned out response. Even though it's tiring, it gives you a response. Okay, so that was the part that had to do with the kind of the emotional dynamic that occurs in a family. This is a triangulation now. Now we're moving into a different pitfall. So before was buttons, emotional responses, trying to keep that under control, strategies around that, and this is a triangulation. So I'll read this. There are different types of triangulation. When it comes to co-parenting, it is important that the parents remain united and in agreement in front of their child, right? You can disagree all you want when your child's not around because, hey, come on, disagreement sometimes breeds a common understanding. But in front of your child, you have to stay united in that way. Open disagreements or one parent sabotaging the other weakens the parental unit and teaches the child to play one parent against the other. So that's classic. Right? You see it in the movies, the TV shows. He'll ask mom, she says no. Ask dad because I think if I ask dad, it'll work out fine. Or it could be the other way around. So that's the triangulation part. Now, the one example I have here for you, is let's just jump here. So there's some strategies around this, right? So triangulation, remember, showing a division in front of the child and or disagreement. So one strategy is, it might seem obvious, but for parents to understand, first of all, we can't show that division in front of them because it only weakens our position and they're going to try to drive that wedge, but also communication. Sometimes the triangulation is by accident, right? You don't even realizing that you're not even on the same page. So making the communication a priority by getting eye contact, trying to refrain from attending to another task. So multitasking. We a lot of times we multitask, but if you have to communicate with your partner on a parental issue with the child, you're better off trying to do it and not multitask. Seriously. And I'll give you a story in a second. Active listening, you probably all heard what this is. Basically, after someone says something, repeat back kind of like the major points so we're on the same page. Because if I got it wrong, we can correct it now. So one good example of this was, and this was a really cute example, little girl had to get 20 minutes of reading done before the most preferred activity before bed. So the most preferred activity, if the kids earn it, is to watch one show before they go to bed, in their parents' bed. So they get to be in their parents' bed, watch one show, and then they're off to bed. Now, again, Both parents, that's their strategy, right? And so I said before, hey, that's what they do. Some people would say, well, I will never let my kid watch a show seconds before going to bed. That might stimulate their brain too much, whatever. The point is that this is what they did, and they were both united on this. That's fine, right? That's our custom. But one of the kids had to read 20 minutes, and the mom tasked the dad to make sure that happens. But of course, she said it, and everyone's multitasking, and he definitely did not hear it, right? So at one point, he goes upstairs with her, and I can hear him say, so are you getting ready for the show? And she's like, no, she's got to read. And now she's trying to communicate from downstairs to upstairs, and he still doesn't quite get it. But he's like, I think mom says you have to read, right? You have to read. Okay, let's go read. So he starts to read with her. And then the sibling goes in and gets ready for the show. And the mom is doing something. She was actually going out that night. She actually had a party to go to, a friend's birthday party. So everybody's multitasking. And so the little kid's in the bed by himself, and it's like, they don't want to be there by themselves. It's supposed to be like, we're all watching this together kind of thing. So the little kid gets out of bed, walks over to her sister's room, says, Dad, Mom says, get her in there, time to watch a show. He's like, really? Mom said that. Okay, let's go. And he brings her in there. And then the mom, of course, is in the bathroom getting ready because she has to get to this party. And she comes out and she's like, did she read 20 minutes? Was it 20 minutes? It was 20 minutes. And now, now what's going to happen? Now the kid's already in bed, right? I remember I took a brief stint of property law once before I became a therapist. And I remember property law. Property law, 90% of property law is possession. If you already have it, you have it. Good luck getting that kid out of the bed. I mean, so to their credit, they realized the mix-up, and they didn't argue or fight over it too much. The parents had some words about this, but because it was really important to the mom that she read 20 minutes. And I had a feeling, because I was still in the family, I had a feeling this wasn't the first time she got out of reading for 20 minutes, right? So this is probably a pattern. It's probably getting her really annoyed. She has to leave. Dad was, and there was a miscommunication. Dad would have followed through if he really understood what the expectation was, but they didn't. So that's just one example. It could be like a little, I would consider that relatively minor versus something that's more serious than this. But it's like, that's the why the parenting communication is so important. Again, close proximity to eye contact. This is if that's not possible though. These parents are very hip. They're young. They have all the technology. I said, you both have Apple Watches. You can just say, boom, text. I do this all the time, and it sends a message, and the person will see it. So it's like you don't have to be in the same room to have this kind of communication in a pinch. You could still do it, and so I suggested that having a collaborative tone, right? Collaborative tone means a lot different things to different people. But what I would suggest is that try to say we more than you. And so if you get into a situation where you're in disagreement with the other parent, and you have the luxury of like going back and like, well, where did that fall apart? I don't understand. You think about, well, how many times did I say you instead of we? Because just replacing those words just makes it way more collaborative. We need to do a better job with the reading before bed, or we need to do a better job communicating, or, I will stop X, Y, Z if you can stop blah, 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 so that we can have a better understanding of what comes next. The we thing goes a long, long way. Okay. Solution focused versus problem focused. So if it's problem focused, it's all about the problem and what's not going well, and usually there's blame that goes in there. I put the word blame in there, but it's usually there's blame in there somewhere. Like, you're not doing this, you're messing up, or you're not listening, whatever the case may be. This is between the parents. And where it's solution focused, it's more about, hey, what needs to happen in order to make this work better? Or, one time it worked this way. Let's focus on, why that happened. And if there's one word that I think helps in this, is using the word because. So I teach this to kids all the time. I use it with parents too. when we use the word because, it forces us to identify what is the purpose behind what I just said. We need to do a better job communicating because she's falling behind in her reading and we're not doing our job. And, it's harder for her at school. It's not fair. And so if you add the because, you identify the concern or the issue. It forces you to do that. It's a way better, higher level of communication. And the other person doesn't have to guess what you're thinking. So using the word because a lot with solution focus can go a long, long way. Okay. And then private. Sensitive stuff in private. Okay. That seems obvious. But I tell you, we do it all the time. As a consultant, I know in schools we do it all the time. We're always talking in front of the kids, it seems. They're always listening. At home, same thing. You think you're talking in code, you can try it, but it's hard. It's hard. There's one family, this mom and dad were talking pig Latin, and that's one thing. I was never really strong on, I was much more of a math science guy. And so when they were doing pig Latin, I'm like, I took an effort trying to understand. I was like, I know this is easy, but it was hard for me. And they used it to talk, so their daughter didn't pick up on what they were saying. But the point is that you want sensitive stuff to be among the two of you behind closed doors. Try not to let it out because it strengthens your unit. And if it's something that the child can't really truly process or understand in the context that you're talking about it can become hard for them. Okay, so now this whole triangulation thing, this is like one of the best strategies ever. So this works great when a child is particularly verbally defiant because we're all verbal here, so we tend to rely a lot on speech. So when someone uses speech back, we process that a very different way than if someone was using sign language, or even sign language could be that way. I take that back. But like if it was a slower process or whatever, but speech gets right to us a lot of times. And so when someone's being verbally defiant, and think about that triangulation. This has to do with the triangulation part. It works wonders if the parents stop what they're doing, literally. Again, if I had a mic, I'd model this. I didn't have this mic, I'd model this for you, but they come together. So mom and dad, all of a sudden they stop what they're doing, they come together and they stare at the child. The longer I stay silent, the more uncomfortable you get. That's just the way it works. They teach us that in therapy school. They say, hey, you want to put the client or the client on this, you want to help them break through. Like, it's not to punish, it's like to get them to like realize something or have those last words just hang over their head. Stare at them. Car salesmen do the same thing, by the way. So the first person who talks gives in. So, but anyways, think about this. It works wonders. Parents come together and they're just looking. And the last thing the kid did, like he said a horrible swear word, or he said something like, "Forget it. I'm not going to celebrate my brother's birthday. I boycott that. Whatever." And they think they have something over you, and I guarantee they won't like it. I mean, it's not punishing them. You're helping them sit with their behavior more, and they will stop and they will move away because it's weird. It's really weird because it's a paradox. As much as they want the two of you, I mean, so like child, right? Typical development. They want the security and the stability of both parents working together. Even if they're divorced, doesn't really matter. They want them working together. They want the stability, but they don't have the same level of control or power if you do. So on one hand, they don't want that. On the other hand, they kind of want it, right? So this coming together emphasizes that. Okay, here are the 3 C's with co-parenting. All right, calm, control, consistent. This is the collaborative part. So So this is something I say to, if this was a pure parenting, I used to do a parenting workshop, and it was a 12. I had the long version, which was a like a 10 or 12 sessions, and then I had the shorter version, which was basically, you get 3 and 4 were done. But I always remember at the very end, I would say, by the way, you cannot control your child's behavior. If I told you that the first time, you wouldn't come back. So I waited to the very end. But in behavioral terms, that's true, meaning that if you have a very young child, right, you can control a lot. You can pick them up, move them over there, put them in the car seat, take them out of the car seat, put that shirt on versus the other shirt. You can do all that. But over time, all that becomes much, much more difficult to manage, right? That, their free will kicks in more and more and more. And regardless of their special needs status, the developmental stages require them to be more autonomous, to practice it. I mean, the first time, not the 10th or 20th time, first time a child pushes off the bowl of the table and it goes on the floor is an amazing act of power. It's like discovering a magic skill, because they never did it before. It's like, it's as amazing as, an Avenger, whatever. It's like, I just did that. Look at that mess. Like, and then they're thinking those words, but they're thinking something like, so they'll do it a few more times unless a boundary gets put around it. I remember I was at a friend's house, and the little girl was throwing food. And this is a friend, they were at some birthday party, and the majority of the family was laughing. And my wife was looking at me, like, Todd, you're not at work. Don't say anything. And I wasn't there. I mean, it would have been rude for me to say anything. And I'm not judging them, but I knew that the laughter most likely was reinforcing the behavior, the attention, the heightened attention, and the like, who wants not to be on? Sometimes we don't want attention, but when we want attention, we want it. And it's like putting a spotlight on it. So that was difficult. That would be difficult for them down the road. But so you can't control your child's behavior. There's 3 things, by the way, from the very beginning. Of course, we realized we really can't control their sleep as much as we would like. We can't control, their eating behavior as much as we would like, and we definitely can't control their bathrooming as much as we would like, right? Those are the 3 things that a child's born with, that we're all born with, that we have, or we begin to understand our limitations as a parent from the very beginning. But moving forward, you can't control the child's behavior, but you can control yours. That's the key part. You can control yours. And if this was more of a parenting session, I would say you can control the environment, right? The environment is everything that's in the house. I remember this one family said, this dad said to this kid, everything under this roof is mine. I don't care if you got it for Hanukkah or whether it's Christmas, your birthday, whatever, you bought it with your own money. It's my house, your home, our home, but my house, everything's mine. Which means that anything can be taken away at any time. That's the essence of the message there. But he was right in that legally it's true, and you have the environment. That's the environment, So a lot of things I work with families nowadays is unplug the Wi-Fi, unplug it, take it. There's one family I'm working with. I'm going to see him later on today. The boy has one, I think, simple thing to do. It's hard. I shouldn't say simple. It's simple from a physics standpoint. Maybe not simple, but it's not a habit yet. So it's actually hard. Is for him to take his lunchbox out of the backpack, empty put the thermos in the sink, and throw out the wrappers in the trash. For the single mom with 3 children, 2 of them special needs, that would be a big deal, right? And he just has never done it. So telling him to do it is great, but he's not going to remember that 24 hours from now. He's going to do the same thing. So the mom, she controls the environment. I said, okay, I noticed that something's plugged on the island. What is that? Oh, that's my PS4 controller. Oh, PS4 controller, great. So this is the deal, and we worked this out. So we made a sign that says, a reminder, don't forget to throw out your blah, blah. Because he wasn't like refusing to do it. That wasn't the problem. He just wasn't doing it. So it's like a stop sign. Stop sign is meant to, it's a rule-governed behavior that we tend to follow. If we see a stop sign, we tend to stop. How many of you stop if no one's around? I do. It's a rule-governed, no, it doesn't mean you're bad if you don't, but it's a rule-governed behavior. Sometimes we just grill, it's a habit. So this boy doesn't have this yet. So we make a sign that says, don't forget, empty, blah, blah, blah. You get only 3 chances in a week, right? And if not, then when you come home, the PS4 controller won't be there. Now, you're not in trouble. It's not taken away. It's just not there, not available. But as soon as you empty your stuff, it becomes available, right? It's not a punishment. It's just, it's called the PREMAC principle. Do something less preferred before you do it more preferred. But because the kid's a teenager and we don't want to cause conflict at home, especially with a single mom, we're giving him a warning system. You get 3 chances. You're not in trouble, but 3 reminders. And if it's 3 times, then in 1 week, because you did 2, then you start over next week. It's like, but eventually it'll be a habit for him. Another one was he's a germophobic. So I had a lot of success telling him why he has to brush his teeth. He used to not brush his teeth. I showed him some videos. I said, this is what your mouth looks like when you don't brush your teeth. He's like, he couldn't believe it. I was actually a little nervous I was going to cause an anxiety, like uncontrolled anxiety in his response. But he actually brushes his teeth now because he doesn't like that. So, but how the germ focus is that he doesn't like to touch his clothes after he takes them off. Like, you've been wearing them. Like 90% of you are touching that same clothing, but you can't like have your fingers touch it now. And I'm just having fun with him. But he's like, I don't know, I don't like doing it. All right, so we talked about using a towel, whatever. But the laundry, the laundry basket was two doors away, and so I said to the mom, okay, you control the environment, and you control yourself. You don't need to get upset or angry over this. So I know it is frustrating. Trust me, I get it. It'd be frustrating to me if I was you. So I get it. Let's take the laundry basket and put it out in front of the bathroom, so he'll bump into it. If this kid is not being defiant. He just doesn't have these habits yet. So what would that laundry basket do? Well, remind me to put it in there. Great. And then the behavioral response is every 3 days, move it about 6 inches back to the laundry room. So in about 3 weeks, 2 weeks, he will walk into the laundry room and do it. But that's controlling the environment. And that's the parent controlling their responses. Okay. You can help each other do this, by the way. So parents help each other. I mean, you guys know your home. You know your kids. You can do this. Okay. So I think that's it. Stability in the storm. Yeah, that whole calm thing is like, remember, if the child with special needs, they're dealing with difficulty, I think, not all the time, but a good chunk of the day at times. School's tough. Relationships are tough. Bless you. Having friends, keeping friends, finding friends, dealing with bullying, tough. So they come home and, I mean, it's typical. Whether it's a child with special needs or not, to unload a little bit when you come home, to unload. And sometimes a parent wears the badge of the emotional touchstone for the child. So that parent sometimes gets most of the flack. Kid got, bullied at school, comes home, parent says something and they just lash out kind of thing, So sometimes having that trying to know what you can know about what's going on in his day, and having that, that kind of like calmer response doesn't mean you're giving in. It just means your calmer response can be that anchor. It's a model. It can be an anchor. And later on you can say, when you said that to me, that kind of really hurt my feelings and bothered me, but I didn't like yell because I was waiting for you to calm down. And that's what I'm trying to help we calm down. I'm calming down, you're calming down. Okay. In fact, I would go as far as saying that maintaining a level of calmness is it's like a primary mission for the unit, like helping each other, not. And think about what has to happen here. Like, you have to respect each other's styles. You have to understand that you're better at this, I'm better at this. Together, though, we bring the whole package. And, I'm going to let you know when I think you're getting upset. You can exit and wait. I'll take it over. Please do the same for me, kind of stuff. It's like, it's maintaining that collaborative unit. that's more effective than the strategy. It's the primary mission. Taking care of yourself and your partner is also a primary mission. I know you've heard this over and over again. I'm not telling you anything new. You have to take care of yourself. But here are some strategies to do that. It's like Saturday night out. So I don't know about you, even though my parents got divorced, before they got divorced, they actually went out every Saturday night. It didn't work great, but that's something they did for themselves at least. Quiet, closeness, eye contact, just that eye contact. You talk about being silent and looking at your children when you're united, that's great, but just between partners or spouses, just having that eye contact time does wonders. And Google it. It does wonders to the mind and physiologically. Gift giving, right? Not just Valentine's, not just birthdays, but just, hey, I thought of you today. Boom. It can even be a text. There's this one person I know, his wife, he have a very traditional kind of relationship. He goes out and works. She stays home, manages. I know that every family's not like that, but part of their arrangement is that she makes the lunch for him because so he can go out, run out the door and not have to worry about buying it. And he told me this. Not every time it doesn't occur to him, but every now and then he will send her a text and say, "Thank you so much for that awesome sandwich you made." And it's a small little thing, but it helps them. It helps them in the times of difficulty. Saying I'm sorry often, right? So for parents or partners or spouses to learn to be able to say I'm sorry to each other is huge. Saying thank you is as huge, if not even more, right? Both of those require humility, right? I made a mistake. I messed up. I'm sorry. Or thanking someone is like, look, I can't do it without you, or it would be a heck of a lot harder, or you're amazing. You did this. I couldn't do it without you. Whatever. Thank you. Or just thank you for the little things. Just thank you. Acknowledge the other person. There's a reason why, believe it or not, I think this is I don't know if it's coincidence or not, but when we say give a compliment, the first word, give a compliment, is the word give. It's like a gift. When we give a gift, you give a compliment. Do you know if they hooked up a bunch of computers to your brain doesn't necessarily know the difference between your consciousness does. But as far as how your brain reacts, whether it's a gift or compliment, it's the same. So it's like giving a gift, giving a compliment. And what can I do for you? At least once a day, which is hard, right? That's hard because it's like, who has time? But once a day, what can I do for you today? Or is there anything I can do for you? Or even it's this week. Is there anything I can do this week for you? Like these are the things that build up relationships and so forth. I want to tell a story. There's a story of two Bills. Of course, I'm not using anybody's real name, but the story of two Bills. This is a true story. Bill, the first Bill, had what you would call classic old school autism. Everything. From his gut, leaky gut, the whole leaky gut thing, his massive seizures, immune system was compromised. He's allergic to everything. I mean, like things like we know the main things, but he was allergic to things like cold cuts, like like turkey cold cuts. I don't know, there must have been something in it, how they prepare it. He had lung problems. He was nonverbal and often engaged in self-injurious behaviors. And he's a lovable guy. One thing they did when he was growing up, they did something that we don't refer to anymore as RDI, Relationship Development Intervention. It's an old model, but they made sure that this kid with autism was going to know what eye contact meant, would know what hugs meant. Although he used to hug too much, so he was a very cuddly, guy. But he had lots of challenges. I remember one time he got into throwing things, but not like he'd take pictures off the wall. I felt bad for one of his brothers because usually his picture, he'd take it and throw it off the wall. And we had to intervene, all this stuff like that. So that's the story of the first Bill. And the story of the second Bill is different kid, different home. This Bill had definitely executive functioning challenges and some ADHD challenges, and significant. He needed medication, therapy, all that kinds of like that. But out of those two families, the mom, and I say the mom, the dad and mom, they both had two parents. The mom and dad in the first family, the first bill with all those serious medical challenges, they seemed to just, I don't know how they did it. They just rolled with it. Hope never left their eyes. They just dealt with it. And they were able to stay calm because, they kind of put things in perspective. They practiced all these strategies and more before I got involved. I helped them along the way, but they helped me too understand why they were so successful. Even to this day, he's 22 now, and they're older. He was their youngest child, so they're older, but they hung it together. They're closer than they ever been, and they really are a tag team, and they've managed to maintain this. The other family, parents are great parents. They are together, they work together, but they never got a hold of their anxiety. Their anxiety would always be through the roof. They never got a hold of it or control of it. And for that second bill, it was always 10 times worse than for the first bill, for the family as far as concerned. So anxiety is a big thing. I think it really does matter getting a handle on it. And as parents, you can get a therapist, get a counselor. I'm a big believer in medication, all that stuff. But as co-parents, if you're in a situation, you really can be the source of stability for one another. Okay, so we're getting close to questions and answer time. I talk about loss, fear, anxiety, and anger, and that's we talked about why that's the case. That first Bill family. They were closer to replacing loss with acceptance. They were closer to replacing fear with hope. That hope never left their eyes. Just seeing the mom's face, just like, well, I only got 2 hours of sleep last night. God, God help me. But I'm like thinking to myself, that's not a one-time thing. They only get each of them 8 hours of sleep once. I don't think they ever get 8 hours, but they get 6, 7 hours is because the other person is on duty. So they take turns. But no one ever has, he goes through sleep cycles. So actually there's times where he'll sleep through the night, but most of the time he won't. And I remember when they were young, I explained to him, I know he loves car rides. I know he loves car rides. I know he loves car rides. But if you take him in the car at 2 a.m, he's going to keep waking up. For sure, because he likes car rides, right? So I remember that a long time ago. But fear, hope, and anxiety, we're all anxious. They have anxiety too, but they never lost faith in one another. And yeah, they had their problems with the school systems. They had their problems with what most people do over time. Nothing was perfect or close to it, but they were able to kind of keep that kind of like that compass in place around, knowing what's really important and sticking together. And yes, of course they got angry at times, but I was amazed of how patient they were. Patient. So that family kind of taught me that these other things, even though we all experience loss, fear, anxiety, and anger, they do too. But if you, as a couple or a parental unit, if you can get closer to the acceptance, hope, faith, and patience, you'll handle the journey much, much better. And so now, here's a commercial. If you want to know more about this, right, then I could always come back and talk about that, because that's this whole special set of ingredients there to get from loss to acceptance and fear to hope and all that. So, okay, so I wanted to make sure we had 30 minutes at least to talk. I could tell more stories about or give explanations or examples. But it's your time to ask me any questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks. 2, 3. So any questions about anything I didn't cover that I can cover? Because I kind of went off script a little bit. I got into some more behavioral type stuff. But I try to stick to the co-parenting discussion. Yes.
So what you referenced one author that would be helpful for us to read a book, Michael Sales, I believe.
So his name was Scott. His name is Scott Sells,
Scott
Sells.
Okay. I'm wondering if you have any other resources you could recommend from my partner, because I come from a clinical background. This all makes perfect sense to me. We definitely work as a team. That's one of the things I love, and I find that challenging with the school system, because the school system always communicates with me, and I always have to CC him on everything. He's in on every Zoom. But he doesn't buy kind of clinical stuff, and I want him to understand the value in using this lens. And I don't know if there's any other resources that I can use. I mean, he's an attorney.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks like an attorney. There's a problem and there's an immediate solution. He doesn't see the value in kind of the process. It's like there's a problem and then you just solve it. And I don't know if there are any other resources for people who think like that, who can see the benefit of some of the strategies that you talked about, or if I should just rely on that one resource.
All right. So if you can give me an example, because you're saying, I know the school, like you could get very, educational focus, clinical kind of terminology and all that part. Yeah. Is that you mentioned that? Is that like an example, or is it more like understanding the nuances of behavioral change?
I think it's understanding the nuances of behavioral change.
Okay.
We definitely work as a team. That's not. I know, because I have other friends who have special needs children who really struggle to work as a team.
Right.
I feel like we work well as a team, but he definitely doesn't understand the value of the behavioral and clinical approaches. He struggles with that.
Right. So does he prefer to respond more in a consequence-driven manner, or like, so the heavier disciplining kind of stuff?
Yes, definitely. If your beginning slides where you talk about the more nurturing versus disciplinarian,
right? I
think he's the one that would lean towards the disciplinarian approach. Yeah.
Okay. So this is what I'll suggest. I have to think about a good book for that, because what I'm trying to think is like one that uses applied behavioral analysis, but explains it in a way where you don't have to really understand ABA, but you understand what it means. Like in all my behavior plans, I actually go through a process of explaining how behavior changes, so that no matter who's reading it, that would make sense. And so I think I'm going to be able to circle back and give you some harder resources, but in the meantime, I think at the very least, this intrigues me, because the whole reason why I got into this field, I mean, seriously, is to work with parents. I mean, I love the kids, don't get me wrong. But I always felt from day one that, rightly, the kids have resources, through the school system, therapists, counselors, you name it. But parents, what resources do they have? So I know for a fact, actually, I have stuff. I mean, I've done parenting classes. I have worksheets. I have like things to know how behavior changes. I could just send you that stuff too. That might be a really good resource, because, one of the best things we do, so we learn through consequences. But we also learn those functions of behavior. We learn because those functions of behavior tend to be reinforced. They're always reinforced, right? So escape, avoidance, whatever it might be. Like there's a family I'm working with now where, the child told the dad that he just had a bowel movement in the garbage can. Okay, this kid's first grade. He's intelligent. He's got some challenges, but he's intelligent. Now, why would he do that? Why would he do that, right? And he absolutely did it, right, to get an emotional reaction from his dad, which worked 100%. And you think, well, how maladaptive is that? Well, it is maladaptive, right? But in order to address that behavior, right, there's so much on the antecedent end. See, if this was a behavioral thing, we talk about antecedents and knowing that most behaviors are addressed and changed before they even occur, right? And how, relying on that. And what I really, really like to do, and some of my handouts that I provide, is just give everyday examples that he would come, like we all live in a world of behavior. So we are respond to the same antecedents and consequences that everybody else does. And so whether he's aware or not, his behavior changes by exactly the same way you would want your child's behavior to change, through use of antecedent and consequences. But rewards, and as I always said, with parenting, with the consequence, it's never ever, as best as you can, never to be unpredictable. You want it to be as predictable as possible. Meaning, like, okay, first time that happened, like the first time this kid pooped in the can, like, okay, that, he got punished for it, obviously, but like, he got scolded, whatever. But it was clarified that, if something like that were to happen again, this is going to be the outcome. Like the other boy who comes home who doesn't empty his lunchbox, give three warnings. Like, if you're always predictable in using a consequence, it's like, I like the Iron Man movie, the first Iron Man movie, Tony Stark. He goes, I think some people think the best weapon is one you never have to use. He's standing in the middle of the desert, as just rockets are flying over his head. He goes, I think the best one, though, is one you only have to use once, right? And so that's a joke. I mean, obviously, but consequences are not actually meant to be used if they're effective, because punishment, when it's really punished, behavior drops like a rock. It's only meant to be used as a warning or once. But if you're punishing over and over again, you're not using an effective consequence, and it becomes emotionally straining on everybody. So there's a lot I can offer you, probably more in that kind of stuff, like parenting worksheets. And then what's...
We can do that because we send out a copy of the video to everybody tomorrow, probably.
Yeah, great.
And if you want to send me, or it doesn't have to be tomorrow, it could be the next day.
Yeah.
If you want to send me the stuff, we can add that to the blast.
That works. That works. And there was one handout in the back that didn't come in your email. And my email's at the bottom too. So you could also email me directly any questions, because I can send it through Eve. I can send it directly to you. Doesn't matter. And I'll mention this in a second, but I want to, if there's any other questions. But sorry I didn't have like a hardcover book, but I think there's even some videos I would suggest, maybe even more. It's easy. Who doesn't watch a YouTube video? Like, it just puts it all in a nice little package. So I think that might be the way to go. Okay.
And I think that a lot of people would benefit from that too. So we can send that out.
Sure. So any questions around behavioral stuff like that? Anything, yes. Hi.
First, I want to say that we had the pleasure and privilege of having Todd help our son, who's now 32, and the kind of things that he did, we just told him, we've just incorporated into our family, and it's helped my son, and I just want to say that publicly.
Sure, thanks.
And then the second thing I wanted to say is, of course, it's so important to work together as we have this many years, Dave and I, but we have a lot of staff for our son. And that is a real challenge to get, it's hard enough for us to stay calm in the storm. But with all the different staffs from home health aides to community support, rec people, it runs the gamut. He's got a huge amount of staffs. So.
Right. Yeah, it's tough to stay on top of that, right? But that's great that you had that. What you've just described is one of those anxiety triggers for a lot of parents, because they really don't know what it looks like post public education. Right.
Yeah, I'm a political advocate, and my little group goes around, gives forums. We haven't done it since the pandemic, but we try to help parents, navigate that 21 and over, because it's really hard to find the apartment, to get all the staffing, and to get him to have a job, which he does, and
Right.
all those things. But it was a massive undertaking,
Right.
and it still is. But
You just reminded me too that when I told the story of the two bills, that first family that were doing better, even though you would think that the challenges were that much greater. That was one thing that she definitely was able to do. The mom, more than the dad, she was really in touch. She learned and was able to tap in to DDS and Medicare and all that stuff. She was one of the very few people that I know that had state-supported supports for her son well before he left school. And it's impossible. And she got him hooked into an agency real fast. She was tapped in from the very beginning. So I would suggest, I think that was a huge part of it for her, she can't control her child or the disability, but she was able to get herself connected and utilize some of the supports that most families didn't even know how to get or approach.
Yeah. It is hard. But I actually, if anyone wants any information, I do try to help families with DDS because I'm on the regional directory, all different kinds of things. But
great.
But getting back to my question, what do you do with all these different staffs to get them to, maybe some of these worksheets that you're mentioning that it's going to give to you, maybe I could give those to the staff too.
Right. That's good. That's excellent. Yeah, because I have tons of stuff. I have one that breaks down all the behaviors, how to respond. It's a flow chart. Very easy visual to use.
They don't get the training they need.
No, they don't. They don't.
Yeah.
So that would be, so providing them with that, I think would be good. I'm sure you're already doing this. So one thing I learned is that working with school systems and large teams of people, that no one person has all the answers. Well, no one person has even most of the answers. It's always a collaboration. Your best teams, your best outcomes have people at the table, whether it's OT, speech, behavior, special ed teacher, paraprofessional. There are people at the table that bring something that is irreplaceable. And so I imagine part of your answer is that, also finding a way, if you don't already do it, you might already acknowledge what each person brings to the table, regardless of that sheet. Like there's something there. They're not perfect. Things could always be better or different, but there's something they're bringing to the table that adds to your son's success. And often they might not know it because, it gets pretty, and I'm sure you guys know this, it gets pretty political. I mean, it's crazy actually how, the different providers can get their guard up around, and it doesn't seem very professional, but it happens all the time. So they probably had experience of second guessing themselves, being more defensive because of whatever. So I think acknowledging for sure what each person brings in their own unique way, and then adding to it.
Yeah,
by the way,
said a compliment too.
Yeah.
I always compliment the staff whenever they do something well.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge.
They need to know.
Thanks. We're also running with the Kennedy Center a series of 3 workshops. I think one was last night about state able accounts and special needs trusts and state DDS and stuff like that. It's not in the back on our list because we just added it, but it is on. They are 3 of them, and they're on our website.
Sure. Great.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been really helpful. And I'm digesting it still. So my teenage son he was born 3 months early, so he's had a variety of things, but many things have not been actually diagnosed until later. So and he's currently in CBT therapy. He's a psychiatrist on medication, but he's also developed anxiety and now depression. So with that, so it's complex. It's like, and it's severe ADHD, executive function, and he's brilliant. So it changes all the time. So I don't know if there's anything you can talk about how that, it's hard to set expectations and consequences and we're getting guidance, and I go to his therapist every other week as well for more parenting education, because it's been hard to know, like, okay, so your kid has this, but then there's no read this, handout, this is what anxiety is, this is what depression is. And so I'm exhausted.
Right.
And don't know if it's like, okay, well now we're also being told to back off as parents, because there's a cycle of executive function and school problems and more anxiety and more social anxiety. And of course he has all kinds of things in place, but it's just a yo-yo of, okay, now that's too much pressure because of the depression, and we're just trying to get this kid medicated, which is we're not there.
Mm-hmm.
And you're still supposed to do your homework, and you still have to get up, and oh my God, did you really just, so
Right.
Anyway, so it's complex and it's a moving target, and I know I'm supposed to be the boat. I'm having trouble being the boat.
You're the anchor.
I'm the anchor.
You're the
oh,
anchor.
Good.
You're the anchor. He's the boat. He's all over the place.
It's like that movie with the horrible waves.
Oh yeah,
lately.
yeah. And okay, so yeah, those are all really, really good points. So on the one hand, I do commend you for having what you have in place already, even though he's not where he needs to be, clearly, but you have some very important people in place, and it sounds to me like, from what you said, you are part of the process, even though it sounds like you could use more information, but you're at least part of the process. Because in my opinion, I mean, a child, even your son's age, they can get a lot out of therapy if they definitely want to be there, they own it, and they acknowledge the purpose of it. For a lot of my clients, I try to help the parents and them understand counseling or therapy is something that you ideally will tap into for much of your life if you need to. Like, you don't have to have a diagnosis to do that, but if you have one, it is a challenge. Get comfortable with the idea of using that resource for you, because but not all kids are the primary consumer, as the term's used. It's often the parent who really wants them to be there, right? And so, but what I would suggest is that, which for good reason, but I would definitely, it's kind of like with anxiety, especially, and depression is very complicated. So to prioritize, you definitely want that part stabilized, like, the medication and the treatment that goes with the self-esteem, and figuring out what are his stressors. What does he identify as his main stressors? Because that's most likely, behind the depression, right? Whether it's social, whether it's bully, whether it's not having a girlfriend, whether it's having whatever it is, what is it? And knowing that, guess what? One thing I keep telling my clients is, I don't care what the problem is, there's always a solution. There's always a solution, often more than one solution. In fact, with the really young kids, I use a scale. I say, what size problem do you have? And they take a rock and they say, okay, I have a small problem. Okay, well, let's see how many solutions you need for that. Because the scale's now down, I put one solution, marble, it evens it out. But if they have a bigger problem, well, one solution doesn't work. So now I got to put 2 on the scale to even it out. And then 3. So we get to the point where, is that like a one solution problem? Some kids are like, I don't want to call it problems. Okay, but is that a 1 solution issue, a 2 solution issue, a 3? Like, how big is this? Because knowing that there's at least a solution that's being applied to it, it's not going to fix it right away, but there's a means and a way to try to resolve this, can really matter to someone who struggles with daily ongoing stressors that feed into that depression. So that's like a discussion, right? So I think a lot of the therapy that happens behind those closed doors turns into parent-child discussions about just that, like, hey, we're going to talk about what's stressing you out, and we're going to remind you what those solutions are, and it's kind of like almost like bridging those therapy sessions with these parental discussions in between. And then the anxiety is also very tricky, but anxiety is clearer, is more, it can be clearer to understand, because anxiety is very, very basic in how it works. We all have healthy anxiety, but if it's an anxiety that's not healthy, then it's going to interrupt in your life, right? It interrupts, causes you to avoid things or do ritualistic behavior that turns into OCD and stuff like that. Often the fear moves from realistic to unrealistic, right? So you have a lot of unrealistic fear too built in. And so you have that part. And then we have a behavior that often is about avoiding or escaping whatever the source of that anxiety is. Like, oh, I'm not going to go to that house or that party. I don't want to go to school. I'm not going to avoid that class, avoid that teacher. I don't want to eat that food versus another food. Whatever's causing stress, right, that feeds into anxiety, the most common approach is to avoid it, to escape it. But the problem with that is because the fear was already unrealistic, and you probably already know this, every time you avoid it, you're feeding right into it. And so I remember using a lesson where there is an anxiety monster. Actually, it's a great book. I can't think of the name of the book right now. Oh, something about Harry. But I can list all this stuff, all these resources. And this boy would go downstairs in his basement, and there was a monster, which represents his fear. And every time he was afraid and ran away from the monster, it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Every time he avoided the basement. But when he learned to actually take a step down the basement, just one step, maybe 2 steps, and over time do the opposite of what he wants to do with that fear, the anxiety monster got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So what that represents in real life is a conditioning approach. So you probably hear like, oh, someone's afraid of they have a phobia of spiders. What does the therapy do? The therapy desensitizes the person by showing them a picture of a spider, maybe from across the room. And that's fine, because you can't avoid the spider. You have to see the spider, right? And then eventually that picture gets closer and closer and closer. Then eventually you have one in a case, and to the point where a real successful outcome is a non-lethal spider is on your arm, okay? But it only happens through repeated exposures, gradual, repetitively greater exposures over time. It doesn't matter whether it's a sensory-driven avoidance, right, like a shirt thing, or physiological, or if it's psychological anxiety. Anxiety can be physiological too, but regardless, exposure. So someone who, for example, I'll give you a generic lay person's example, public speaking, right? If someone's afraid of public speaking, they avoid it. And they avoid it so much that, God forbid, if they ever had to say something in front of the others, they just can't do it. So one way to get over that is to purposely begin to talk to yourself in the mirror, right? And then talk in front of 2 or 3 people. Build up that. Every time you expose yourself to the actual stressor, your anxiety shrinks. Because only for anxiety to grow, you have to feed into it by avoiding or escaping whatever the stressor is. That's, and then an OCD pattern that's similar to that is, let's say someone's afraid of the oven being on or the door not being locked. Okay, there's the fear. So in that case, to avoid the fear, you're not like avoiding the oven or you're avoiding the door. You're doing the opposite. You're actually checking the door, checking the oven, right? And so you're checking it. Every time you check it, the first thing you get the hit is a relief. The oven's not on. Or the door is locked. Good. And that's the reinforcer that feeds into the anxiety. So every time you check the door or check the oven, you get reinforced, but the anxiety gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It never goes away. And anxiety actually grows over time and generalizes, and it becomes an uncontrollable, unwieldy beast. So exposure. So if your son knew that, like if you talk to him, like the therapy handles the parts of that. And then as a parent, you're like, hey, look, I understand that anxiety is something that if you feed, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So there's nothing so the solution is to take very, very small steps. Very small steps. if anybody has, there's a great article by Ken is his first name. I'm horrible with names. I do a lot of talks on eating too, challenges. And one of the handouts here, this handout, it's a parent group on helping your kids not be picky eaters. So much awesome research on that. The fear is the food, right? So what do? We avoid the food. But it could be anything in life. And so what they found is that you can take that food item, let's say call it a piece of macaroni or a pea, or there's one boy I'm working with now. It's a hamburger. But regardless of whatever it is, the science is very clear. It doesn't matter what the size of the item is. It doesn't matter. What I grew up with was, eat the whole thing, right? And that was a struggle. But what we found is that if you can take that pea or that macaroni and cut it so it's so small you can barely see it, that's like a very small exposure. Doesn't matter what it is, right? A class, driving, going somewhere or whatever. Just have a very small exposure, and then you accomplish it. The tiny little thing, you just put it in your mouth now. It's tiny. You don't even taste it. And now you got over that fear, like that initial fear of that one item, that one little thing. But now they get a little bigger. The exposure gets bigger and bigger. Before you know it, the person is now over the anxiety around that particular food item. And what they found is that every other food item that comes that way, the new and novel item, it's less and less of a struggle, to the point where they, after so many, they try food now. So why did I say that example? Because it's a great example. That's how anxiety works. Repeated exposures. Now, if your son knew that, if you guys talked about that, you'd be like, hey, I know this is causing you a lot of anxiety. Social, okay, yeah. And that's tough because a pea or macaroni or the oven or doors, these are all controllable. You can't control social as much, right? But you can control what you do. So when I coach some kids through this, I say, don't approach the group that has 6, 7, 8 people. Approach the person that has one person, right? Approach a dyad versus, 7 or 8, and make sure that person has certain qualities that you already know they're friendly. They've never done anything mean to you, right? And you know their name. And if you don't know their name, you're gonna at least say hi, whatever. You start very small. I tell kids all the time, the only thing you need to do is look at them and smile and move on. Just try that. Look and smile and move on. That's all you need to do, because that's always the prerequisite before saying, how many times have you say hi to someone and you never got eye contact first? So it's you can do it, but it's difficult sometimes. So you always get eye contact usually first. So smile, eye contact. When they smile back, that's your cue to say hi now or to say their name, because they smile back. And so there's sometimes there's a building block, but all we're talking about is real small, minor exposures, little building blocks that can take your son in a certain direction, knowing now that, we have a plan, we have a solution. It's going to be a while, but it's something you can apply and work over time. And eventually, he will get more comfortable with it. But you have to find what social environments are lower on the scale. One of them is called risky behavior. What's risky? Well, jumping out of a plane, with a parachute is risky versus lying on your couch reading a book. Too extreme, right? Well, sometimes we treat social behaviors as jumping out of a plane, where if you pick the right one, it's more like sitting on a couch. But you have to pick the right one. You're not gonna go up and ask someone out to a dance right away. That's in all the movies. That's the most risky thing for a guy or girl to do, according to the movies. Oh my God. But smiling and looking at someone and knowing someone's name and then saying their name, hey Bill or hey Jack, and that's it. That's the only thing you have to do today. And so you build a schedule up very gradually, and you can get around that a bit. But so it's I think having those very practical strategies that you can talk to with them as a parent to follow through between the therapy sessions is one way to go. But there's always a solution no matter what the problem is. Yeah.
Any parents that are struggling with their kids in any way is to find a parent support group of other parents who and it's enormously helpful because you have people who are going through similar issues and you don't feel alone, because when you're dealing with problematic behavior or learning disabilities or other, you can feel very alone, even if you're working very closely with your spouse or partner.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Because you don't, I mean, as Eva was saying earlier before you guys came, like there's a whole lot of parents out there who are struggling with what you're struggling with. You add it, regardless of the special needs status, just when you add the special needs status, it just is a whole nother layer on top of what's all the other kids are dealing with. So I agree. Yeah, parent support group is great. Sometimes you get that through things like SpedNet or great. Yeah. By the way, you keep reminding me that one family that I kept talking, the first Bill, she also ran a parenting support group. She had that from when he was in preschool. It's like, I'm thinking now, yeah, these are the ingredients that were part of her keeping those 3 C's, being, calm and consistent and so forth. So, okay, great. Yeah. Support's huge.
And thank you. This was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Yes. So, I run a lot of social skills, but there's most of my groups now are middle school teens and young adults. And last summer we ran some during the summer that were real successful. I teamed up with a guy named Brett Yaris, who's a behavioral motivational movement expert. Gets kids to move and want to move and be active and physical, whether it's through exercise or active leisure and so forth. So I team up with Brett. We share the same building. And what we did last summer is we had these summer rec groups where kids would come and do, volleyball, cornhole, cook out hamburgers on a grill in just 3 hours, once or twice a week, just to kind of fill in, get them connected with some of the kids. We group kids that are relatively compatible, and that's something we do. But in addition, we had social fitness groups before COVID, which was really fun because these kids, they go, it's like an exercise group, but now you can have, with conversation-based social skills, you kind of need them within a grade or 2 apart. But when it comes to physical fitness, like learning how to stretch and do yoga and core exercises and pull-ups and all that stuff like that, you can actually mix the ages up. It actually works out fine. Some of the older kids, younger kids, they actually motivate each other, depending on the situation, and you can embed social skills with that. So we did that. So we want to bring that back. Grit. So there's 2 areas of research that I got into that I really, really love. One's perseverance, and the other is eating habits, because they're both heavily researched. But most people don't realize what it takes in order for someone to develop perseverance or grit, resilience. And most parents don't understand. It's our family of origin, how they were raised, which is fine, but they don't realize the science that's available that helps them tackle these really picky eating challenges, or whether it's sensory or anxiety. It's the same approach. So we want to offer those up. But the grit one is great. I mean, I did this with kids. I used to do this all the time with them when I was in the Wilton office, and it's like it's amazing what they avoid because they feel like failure is permanent. Failure is not fun. Failure means you didn't succeed. But if you actually walk them through a set of exercises where you prove to them that the failure is always temporary, it's never permanent. So we never promise you're going to be an expert in anything. Like you're not, you start, like I remember this, the most basic example was I was sitting with a boy who was, I think, in detention years ago over at, not detention, but he was in a timeout, whatever, something like that at Cider Mill. And we had a garbage can. He was afraid of everything. We had a garbage can that was over there. And we started rolling up paper, which he loved to do, like old work, and throwing it in the garbage can, right? So I would track how many times he missed. And like all new behaviors, whether it's golf or skiing, physical activities are perfect, but whether it's reading or math, it doesn't really matter what the activity is. You always fail up front. And so he missed like 80%, but he didn't care. He didn't know I was tracking him. He didn't know what the expectation was. And after doing that for about 45 minutes or so, sure enough, if I broke it down in 5-minute increments, his success rate jumped up to something like 45, 60, 45, 50%, forget what it was, but it was much higher. And when you put that on a graph, it's like, wake up, look at that. So you apply that to lots of things and you realize, everything you've decided not to quit ever, the chart always looks like this. Because rate of behavior is very fast in the beginning, right? When you really learn a new skill, I use golf. I don't golf, but people who golf, or tennis, I do play tennis, or skiing. Like you think, oh my gosh, it takes me 3 seasons to go ski, learn how to ski, whatever. Yeah, but if you stretch that over like 4 or 5 years, you learn everything up front. And yeah, you get marginally better every year, but most of the rate of change has already happened because you don't give up. But you have to deal with, so we do things like, I don't care if it's ping pong on bouncing a ping pong ball in the air or playing a video game, which they all do. And so Dumb Ways to Die is a great game, or it's a silly game, or Temple of Doom, whatever it was, or there's some really hard games. They all generate a score. And so if you just write those scores down, you realize that after you've played that, 3 times in a row now, it goes like this. And so after they realize that is the formula, that you never ever permanently fail at anything, now you can try anything you want. Recognize that the chart will be like that, though. You'll first suffer, and not suffer, but bike riding is the same thing. If someone goes on a bike, so nowadays, gliding bikes are great. The gliding bikes are, basically you just sit on there and you're just using your feet to glide. There's no pedals and there's no training wheels. And so what happens is that you're standing there, and every time your foot has to touch the pavement as you're gliding, you consider that a failure because you can't maintain balance. But that's okay, because the expectation is you're going to do that anyways. But what happens is the child does it over time. They realize they can take larger steps, and they're now gliding longer in the air to the point now where they can rest their feet on a stand. And then you put the pedals on. And so that you can chart that, and it looks exactly like the ping pong or everything else you chart, the basket, the paper ball, the paper in the basket. It goes up like that. And before you know it, you're riding a bike. But you have to be okay with having your feet touch the ground first. Most kids are fine with that. The old way was on the training wheels or, actually falling, and you can learn that way too, but no one wants to persevere through falling as much as just having their feet touch the ground. So once they realize that is the formula, the door's wide open. And that's the grit formula. Angela Duckworth, she, if you're not familiar with her, she did a TED Talk, and she was allowed to go to West Point, one of the hardest schools to get into, one of the hardest schools to stay in once you get in. West Point does a lot of investment, psychologists, medical, leadership surveys. They try to find the perfect candidates to survive their program. They spend a lot of money at it, and they have a success rate of how good they are predicting whether a candidate is going to survive the next 4 years. So Angela Duckworth comes, and she has a 12-question survey on one sheet. And her 12-question survey only focused on grit, resilience, not about looks, money, strength, leadership capabilities, intelligence, none of that stuff. All the other things they measured, not this one, just that. And she had a higher success rate in predicting the person getting through 4 years than all the other standard tests that they used. Look it up. It's amazing. Grit. So why do I say that? Because once children learn that they can persevere, then the sky's the limit. So that's why I'm offering that. It's a huge thing. There's a parenting part to that as well. Anyways, I did that once, and I was like, I got to bring that back. That was such a fun thing to do. So we are I'm trying to move some of my work more towards groups as I'm turning 56 next week. I want to finish this out with more groups because I just can get more people, whether parent groups or parent sessions. These are the focus areas we're going to be offering spring, definitely into the summer. And we'll try to keep moving in that direction. So that's just a commercial. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for making it.